Long before empires rose, before walls snaked across mountains, before a single name echoed through all of Asia, there was a land of rivers and gods, of chaos and clay, and in that land began the story of China. Cue slow zoom over the Yellow River basin, mist swirling. This story begins not with kings, but with myths. In ancient times, the Chinese believed that the world was born from a cosmic egg, darkness and light, yin and yang, swirling together until a great primordial giant Pangu emerged. He held the sky and the earth apart for 18,000 years, and when he finally died, his body became the land. Rivers, mountains, and stars. From Pangu's remains came the first humans, and soon after, the culture heroes who tamed the wild world. The first was Fuxi, the divine teacher who taught humans how to hunt and fish, how to write, and how to marry. Then came Nua, the goddess who molded people from yellow clay and repaired the sky with 5-colored stones. And then Shannon, the divine farmer, tasting herbs to learn medicine, some of them so poisonous they say he died dozens of times. These figures shaped a moral universe, a mythic foundation of China's identity, one rooted in order, balance, and harmony with nature. But myths would give way to history. Around 2700 BCE, the Yellow Emperor Huangdi emerges from the fog of legend. More than just a tribal chief, Huangdi was believed to be a divine ruler who brought fire, silkworm farming carts, the calendar and medicine. He fought a titanic war against the rebellious warlord Chu, whose bronze-headed soldiers were said to breathe smoke and fog, disrupting the skies. In the legendary Battle of Zhualu, Huangdi defeated him with the help of a south-pointing chariot, an early compass, and celestial tactics. Whether Huangdi truly lived is unknown. But the tribes who claimed descent from him eventually unified a broad region in the Yellow River Valley, the cradle of Chinese civilization. By 5000 BCE, real archaeological history begins to take shape. The Yangshao culture, one of China's earliest Neolithic societies, flourished in the Central Plains. They lived in semi-subterranean homes, cultivated millet, and raised pigs and dogs. Most strikingly, they painted elegant red and black geometric designs on their pottery. Not just functional, but beautiful. To the east, along the lower Yellow River, the Longshan culture arose. They were more hierarchical, with evidence of walled towns and social elites. They practiced complex burial rituals. Some graves had jade, others had none. The seeds of inequality, governance, and urban planning had been planted. One legend rises above all others in ancient Chinese memory, the Great Flood. A disaster so massive it lasted for generations. Rivers overflowed, villages drowned. Very land was said to rebel against humanity. In this time of peril, a hero named Gun tried to hold back the waters with dikes, but failed. You took a different path? You didn't fight the water. You redirected it. You traveled for 13 years, carving channels through mountains, dredging rivers, and digging canals. He never returned home, not even once. In some versions, he walked past his own doorstep 3 times without going in, because the flood had not yet been tamed. And when it was finally done, the people made him king. Thus, the Xia Dynasty was born. The Xia Dynasty is said to have ruled from around 2070 to 1600 BCE. It is the first dynasty in traditional Chinese historiography. But here lies the puzzle. For centuries, historians could not prove it existed. The earliest records, like Sima records of the Grand Historian, written 1,000 years later, tell us of 17 Xia kings. They describe a dynasty with bronze tools, a court system, and even hereditary rule passed from father to son. But no definitive Xia writings survive. No palaces, no names etched in stone, just legends and a trail of ruins. Still, recent discoveries at Erlitou, a site in Henan province, hinted a state-level society matching Xia's supposed timeline. Palatial structures, bronze workshops, jade artifacts. It may have been the Xia, or an unnamed kingdom, that inspired the myth. The truth may lie in between. The Xia could be both a cultural memory and an early form of Chinese statehood, a bridge between myth and historical record. The era of mythic kings, of Fuxi Nua, Yu the Great, shaped not just China's past, but its soul. Even today, school children learn their names, Temples still honor their spirits. And beneath China's modern highways and skyscrapers lie the ruins of these ancient dreams. But from here, the mists of legend begin to part. The next age will not be one of myths, but of bronze and blood, of recorded kings and divine mandates. The Shang are coming. They bring fire. In the valleys of the Yellow River, where myths once breathed and clay gods ruled the skies, a new sound rose, clash of bronze, the chant of ancestors, and the measured beat of drums that echoed through time. The age of myth was ending. History was awakening. Around 1600 BCE, a powerful kingdom emerged in the Central Plains, the Shang Dynasty. Unlike the elusive Xia, the Shang left behind something tangible: artifacts, writing, bones. Their cities rose with planned grids, massive palaces, and rammed earth walls. They ruled from capitals like Zhengzhou and Yin near present-day Anyang. What set the Shang apart was bronze, two intricate bronze vessels being cast. They perfected the art of casting, not by hammering, but through piece mold casting, a technique nearly unique to China. They created ritual vessels adorned with touty, stylized monster masks that stared into the void. These were not tools for survival. They were symbols of power, of reverence, of communication with the ancestors. The Shang kings turned to the bones of animals to speak with the divine. Oracle bones, the shoulder blades of oxen, and the plastrons of turtles were carved with questions to the ancestors. Will the harvest fail? Should we go to war? Will the king's wife give birth safely? And the bones were heated until they cracked. Diviners read the cracks like omens, carving the results beside the original question. These etchings became the earliest known form of Chinese writing. Over 3,000 characters were recorded, many still recognizable today. China had entered the realm of recorded history. Shang kings ruled through a complex hierarchy. They were both warriors and priests, commanders of armies and intermediaries with the dead. Their society was rigidly stratified. The king stood at the center, claiming divine right through ancestral communication. Nobles served as regional lords and military commanders. Artisans and craftsmen lived in cities, producing bronzes, ceramics, and textiles. Peasants worked the land and paid tribute. And at the bottom, were captives and slaves, sometimes sacrificed to honor the dead. War was constant. Chariots pulled by horses recently imported from Central Asia thundered across the plains. Enemies were captured, decapitated, and their skulls buried beneath royal tombs. And yet, for all their brutality, the Shang built a culture of beauty, one obsessed with ritual, cosmic balance, and the sacred duty to remember the past. By the 11th century BCE, the Shang were in decline. The last Shang king, Di was said to be cruel and decadent, building pools of wine, ordering horrific tortures, and ignoring omens. To the west, a vassal state watched. The Zhou, a semi-barbarian people from the Wei River Valley, saw their moment. Under King Wu of Zhou, they launched a rebellion in 1046 BC. At the Battle of my Shang forces, many of them enslaved or conscripted, turned against their king. The Shang were defeated, Di committed suicide. The Zhou seized power. A new dynasty had begun. The Zhou introduced a radical concept to justify their rule, the mandate of heaven. Unlike divine bloodlines of the past, the mandate said that heaven grants authority to virtuous rulers only. If a king became corrupt, heaven would withdraw its favor, and rebellion would be justified. It was moral, cosmic, political, and it would shape Chinese legitimacy for over 2,000 years. The early Zhou created a feudal state. The king granted lands to his relatives and loyal nobles, forming regional principalities across northern China. Each noble ruled his own territory, but owed military service and tribute to the Zhou court. The capital moved to Luoy, today's Luoyang, near the center of the Chinese heartland. This feudal structure worked for a time. Chinese culture flourished. Bronze casting continued. Rituals were codified. The ancient Book of Songs and Book of Rites originated in this period. Yet beneath the surface, cracks formed. In 771 BCE, barbarian tribes invaded from the west. The Zhou capital was sacked. The royal court fled east to Luoyang. Thus began the Eastern Zhou period, an era of decline, but also of brilliance. The Zhou king still ruled in name, but power shifted to the regional lords. Over the next 500 years, China fractured into competing states. First hundreds, then dozens. This chaos gave rise to the Spring and Autumn period, and later the Warring States period. But from this division, a new revolution emerged. Thinkers, philosophers, and visionaries. In a time of disorder, people asked, what is the right way to live? How should rulers govern? What makes a just society? And so arose the 100 schools of thought. Confucius taught that harmony came through duty, hierarchy, and moral example. His vision of a virtuous gentleman, the Junzi, became the moral compass of a civilization. Laozi, founder of Taoism. Dada. The universe follows the Tao. The way. A path of effortless balance, flowing like water. Mozi argued for universal love and merit-based rule. Legalists like Shang and Han Fizi believed people were inherently selfish, and only strict laws and harsh punishments could ensure order. These thinkers laid the spiritual and intellectual foundations of China, ideas that endure to this day. By 256 BCE, the Zhou dynasty, weakened, irrelevant, was finally extinguished. The warring states devoured each other. 7 major powers remained. In the West, one of them would rise, ruthless, efficient, the state of Qin, and from their iron grip, a new world would be forged. A world of unity, walls, standardization, fire, but for now, the Zhou were gone. The age of empires was about to begin. The Zhou dynasty was dead, not with a roar, but a whimper. Its kings lingered like shadows, powerless. China was now a land without unity, a land of warlords, blood, and brilliant minds. For nearly 500 years, the Middle Kingdom would tear itself apart, until from the wreckage one state would rise and forge the first Chinese empire. After the fall of the Western Zhou in 771 BCE, China entered the Spring and Autumn period, named after a chronicle kept by the state of Lu. Roughly 170 small states jockeyed for dominance, all claiming allegiance to the weakened Zhou king. In this chaos, some states grew stronger. Qi, Jin, Qiu, Qin, and Lu among them. Political marriages, assassinations, and shifting alliances became the norm. Confucius, who lived during this era, watched the decay of virtue and authority. He taught that the way forward was not power, but morality. But the world around him listened more to generals than to sages. By 475 BCE, diplomacy gave way to annihilation. The Warring States period had begun. 7 dominant states now remained: Qi, Ku, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin. Their borders hardened. Their armies swelled. And the violence became scientific. This was an age of relentless innovation. Iron weapons replaced bronze. Cavalry replaced chariots, crossbows, siege towers, and even early landmines emerged. Massive walls were built between states, the first fragments of what would one day become the Great Wall. This was not just war, it was transformation. The dream of uniting all under heaven was not dead. It was now a prize to be taken by fire and steel. To the west, the state of Qin was once considered barbaric, rough, simple, and far from the centers of culture. But in this simplicity lay strength. In the 4th century BCE, a legalist named Shang transformed Qin forever. He abolished aristocratic privilege. He rewarded soldiers based on kills. He registered households, standardized punishments, and made the people answerable only to the law. Qin became a machine of conquest, efficient, brutal, and relentless. By the late 3rd century BCE, under King Zhang, Qin launched a final campaign to conquer all other states. In 230 BCE, Qin destroyed Han. In 227 BCE, a failed assassination attempt only hastened the fall of Yan. In 221 BCE, the last rival, Qi, surrendered without a fight. For the first time in recorded history, China was unified under one ruler. King Zhang declared himself Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of Qin. He was no longer a king, he was the son of heaven, and his rule would redefine what China meant. Qin Shi Huang wasted no time. He standardized weights and measures to unify trade. Coinage, so that commerce flowed under one currency, the written script, so every official across the empire could read imperial edicts. He built a vast network of roads, 6,000 kilometers across the empire. He connected and extended existing walls, forming the early Great Wall to defend against northern nomads. He abolished feudalism, replacing lords with centrally appointed governors. The empire was now one system, one order under one man. But unity came at a cost. In 213 BCE, Qin Shi Huang ordered the burning of all books not aligned with legalist doctrine, Confucian texts, historical records, and philosophical treatises. A year later, it was said that 460 Confucian scholars were buried alive for defying the regime. Modern historians debate the truth of this tale, but the terror it represents was real. The Qin saw thought as a threat. Order was enforced not by virtue, but by fear. As Qin Shi Huang aged, his obsession turned to death, or rather escaping it. He drank mercury potions, sent fleets to the eastern seas in search of mythical immortality islands, and consulted alchemists and mystics. But despite all his power, in 210 BCE, while on a tour of his empire, he died. His death was kept secret for weeks, his corpse transported in a cart filled with rotting fish to mask the smell. The emperor who had ruled all under heaven was gone. Qin Shi Huang's tomb remains unopened to this day, but what lies around it is one of the greatest archaeological finds in history. An army of over 8,000 terracotta soldiers, life-sized, each with unique faces, stood buried in formation. They guarded the emperor in death as they had in life, with chariots, horses, archers, and officers. The tomb is said to contain rivers of mercury, stars on the ceiling, and palaces underground. This was no resting place. It was a kingdom below the earth. The Qin had united China. They could not hold it. Qin Shi Huang's son lacked his father's authority. The people, crushed under taxes, labor, and fear, rose in rebellion. Former generals and peasants alike joined the revolt. By 206 BCE, just 15 years after unification, the Qin dynasty collapsed, but its legacy could not be erased. Though brief, the Qin dynasty forged an idea more powerful than any emperor, that China could be one. One writing system, one law, one civilization. Qin Shi Huang built more than roads or walls. He built the template for Chinese governance for the next 2,000 years. And from the ashes of his empire would have risen one of the greatest dynasties the world has ever known. Next, the Han Dynasty. Glory, expansion, Silk Roads, and the soul of China. From the smoke of rebellion and the broken rule of the Qin rose something greater. The Han Dynasty would not just rebuild China, it would define it. A civilization reborn, golden age of learning, commerce, and culture, where emperors ruled the world and the world began to know China. This was the Han, and this was the making of a Chinese identity that still echoes today. After the collapse of the Qin, China fell into chaos once again. Warlords vied for power. Most powerful was Shang, a brilliant noble warrior, but history would favor a peasant. Liu Bang, a former police officer from humble origins, was clever, charismatic, and patient. In 202 BCE, he defeated Shang at the Battle of Xia and declared himself emperor, Emperor Gaozu of Han. This was more than a military victory. It was a revolution in class and identity. The mandate of heaven had passed. To a commoner, the early Western Han dynasty focused on rebuilding. Harsh Qin laws were softened. Forced labor was reduced. Confucianism, once persecuted, returned as a guiding philosophy. The Han court established a bureaucracy based on merit. Over time, civil service exams would emerge. A system where intelligence, not just bloodline, defined a man's future. China's territory expanded. Roads and canals were built. Agriculture was stabilized, but the Han did more than survive. They began to shine. Under Emperor Wu of Han, who reigned from 141 to 87 BCE, Confucianism became the state ideology. Loyalty to one's family mirrored loyalty to the emperor. Rituals, order, and moral governance became sacred duties. Schools were built to teach the 5 classics: texts that blended wisdom, law, and myth. A new class arose, the scholar officials, known as Shi. They were the backbone of Chinese administration for the next 2,000 years. Emperor Wu did not only look inward, he sent emissaries west. Among them, the famous diplomat, Zhang Qian, who traveled deep into Central Asia, though captured by the Zhongnu nomads and held for years. Zhang returned with tales of distant civilizations, horses of heaven, and new routes across the world. Thus was born the Silk Road. Silk flowed west to Rome and Persia. Glass, grapes, and gold came east. Alongside goods came ideas, Buddhism, art, music, even styles of dress. The Han were no longer a regional power. They were a civilizational superpower, connected to 3 continents. The Han were creators, not only of policies, but of wonders. Paper was invented by Tsai Lun in the 2nd century CE, revolutionizing record-keeping and education. Seismographs detected distant earthquakes using pendulums and dragons' mouths. Astronomers mapped stars and predicted eclipses. Advanced ironworking, plows, and textile looms boosted agriculture and industry. Science and technology flourished, not for war, but for civilization. Yet the Han also knew war. They waged campaigns against the Zhongnu, fierce nomadic horsemen to the north who raided the borders. Under generals like Huo Qubing and Wei Qing, Han forces pushed deep into Central Asia, building forts, expanding influence. To the south, they conquered parts of modern-day Vietnam and Yunnan. To the west, they clashed with kingdoms in modern Xinjiang and beyond. The Han dynasty's borders stretched farther than any Chinese empire before it. For the people, life under the Han varied greatly. Nobles lived in grand estates with lacquered furniture and silk garments. Farmers, though still taxed, had access to land and tools. Women in noble families were educated. In peasant families, they ran households and worked fields. Music, poetry, and storytelling flourished in both court and countryside. Han art depicted elegant horses, dragons, and detailed everyday scenes. A window into a living, breathing civilization. But no golden age lasts forever. Court factions, especially eunuchs and imperial relatives, grew powerful and corrupt. Natural disasters were seen as signs that heaven's favor had waned. Peasant revolts flared, most famously the Red Eyebrows, who wore makeup to identify one another. On 09 CE, a scholar official named Wang Mang usurped the throne and declared a new dynasty, the short-lived Xia Dynasty. He attempted radical reforms, land redistribution, new coinage, outlawing slavery, yet floods, famine, and rebellion destroyed him. By 25 CE, the Eastern Han was restored under Emperor Guangwu. The Eastern Han, with its capital in Luoyang, began as a restoration. Science and literature thrived again, but the same patterns re-emerged. Powerful eunuchs manipulated emperors. Local warlords built private armies. Imperial court became a battlefield of whispers. In 184 CE, the Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted. A Taoist-inspired uprising calling for a new age. Though crushed, it shattered the illusion of unity. In the final decades of the 2nd century CE, the Han emperors became puppets. Warlords like Dong Zhuo, Cao Cao, and Liu Bei vied for power. By 220 CE, the last Han emperor abdicated. The Han dynasty, after more than 400 years, was no more. But the legacy it left behind, Confucian governance, the civil service, Silk Road diplomacy, Chinese identity itself, would echo through every dynasty that followed. Next, the Age of Fracture, the Romance of Heroes, the Three Kingdoms, and the Rise of New Dreams. The Han dynasty was gone, not with a peaceful transition, but in fire, betrayal, and rebellion. China shattered into pieces once more, but this time the chaos would give birth to legends. Generals, tacticians, warlords, and poets, all vying to shape the future of a broken empire. This is the story of an age of heroes, the long, grueling road back to unity. In 220 CE, the once mighty Han splintered into 3 rival states. Wei, in the north, ruled by the powerful warlord Cao Cao and his successors. Shu, in the southwest, led by the idealistic Liu Bei, a man claiming descent from the Han royal family. Wu, in the southeast, ruled by the cunning son Quan and his naval commanders. This was the era of the Three Kingdoms, immortalized centuries later in the literary epic romance of the Three Kingdoms, one of China's four great classical novels. The empire, long divided, must unite. Long united, must divide. These were not mere soldiers. They were archetypes of brilliance and virtue. Cao, ruthless and pragmatic, was feared and admired alike. Liu Bei, humble and loyal, was often outmatched, but never gave up. Zhuge Liang, Liu Bei's chief strategist, became a legend of wisdom and foresight, using fire, trickery, and even weather as weapons. Guan Yu, Liu Bei's sworn brother, became the god of war in later centuries. Zhou Yu, the brilliant commander of Wu, orchestrated the decisive victory at Red Cliffs, where fire ships burned an entire enemy fleet. Behind every blade was a mind. In 208 CE, Wei sought to conquer the south. Its massive navy sailed down the Yangtze River, confident of victory. But the allied forces of Wu and Shu, outnumbered and outgunned, struck with cunning. They chained the Wei fleet together and set it ablaze with fire ships. The river turned into an inferno. Wei retreated. The south remained free. For a time, this moment, the Battle of Red Cliffs, would become one of the most celebrated in Chinese memory. For decades, the Three Kingdoms fought, exhausted resources, and betrayed one another. Wei defeated Shu in 263, Wu fell to Wei's successor state, Jin, in 280, the Qing Dynasty. Under Sima Yan, briefly reunited China, but unity was fleeting. Corruption returned. Court rivalries escalated. And in 311 CE, the Xiongnu, now inside China's borders, sacked Luoyang, the Qin capital. In 316, Chang'an fell. The western Qin collapsed. For over 300 years, China would remain divided between the north and the south. In the north, a whirlwind of 16 kingdoms, mostly led by nomadic or semi-nomadic peoples. Gongnu, Ji, Shanbai, Di, Kong. These were violent years of migration, war, and hybrid rule. In the south, a series of Han Chinese dynasties, Eastern Jin, Lusong, Southern Qi, Liang, and Chen ruled from cities like Jiangkong, maintaining Confucian ideals and scholarly tradition. The Yangtze River became not just a lifeline, but a cultural fault line. Despite the instability, this period saw a surprising cultural bloom. Buddhism, once a foreign faith, began to take root in China. Monks like Kumarayiva translated Sanskrit texts into Chinese. Giant cave temples were carved into cliffs like the Yangon grottos and Longmen caves, filled with towering Buddhas and celestial beings. Ideas of karma, rebirth, and detachment began to blend with Taoism and Confucianism. Meanwhile, artists and poets embraced nature and melancholy. One famous figure, Dao Yuanming, retired from politics to live in solitude, writing gentle odes to flowers, rivers, and wine. Even in a broken age, beauty endured. In the north, the so-called barbarian rulers slowly became Chinese in culture. The Tuoba Xianbai, a nomadic group, founded the Northern Wei Dynasty. They adopted Chinese language, dress, and customs. They promoted Buddhism and reformed land policies. Their capital, Luoyang, became a center of mixed traditions, Chinese and steppe, Han and non-Han. China was not only fractured, it was transforming, ethnically, culturally, spiritually. This was no longer the world of the Qin and Han, it was something new. In the late 6th century, the Northern Zhou Dynasty, itself founded by nomadic elites, held sway over the north. From within its court rose a powerful general and regent, Yang Jian, a man of ambition and vision. In 581 CE, he seized power and declared a new dynasty, the Sui. Within a few years, he conquered the south, ending the Qing Dynasty. For the first time in nearly 400 years, China was unified again under one rule. The Sui dynasty was short-lived, but revolutionary. Yang Jian, now emperor when of Sui, implemented legal reforms, centralized power, and promoted Buddhism. He began work on one of history's great engineering feats, the Grand Canal, linking the Yangtze River in the south with the Yellow River in the north. It allowed grain, goods, and troops to move across the empire efficiently. But his son, Emperor Yang of Sui, expanded too fast, built too grand, and waged too many wars, especially against Korea. Revolts erupted. The dynasty collapsed by 618 CE, and yet they had laid the groundwork for something even greater. For 400 years, China lived in a state of fracture and fusion. Warlords and sages, monks and emperors, nomads and Confucians, all shaped this long night. And though no single dynasty endured, the soul of the Chinese world adapted, absorbed, and evolved. With the Suez Grand Canal and centralized rule in place, a new golden age was rising on the horizon, an age of poetry, prosperity, and power. The Tang Dynasty was coming. Next, the golden age of China, trade, literature, and cosmopolitan glory. The era of the Temps. The dust of centuries had settled. War had given way to unity. The rivers flowed again, not with blood, but with grain and silk. And into this moment of balance stepped a new dynasty, one that would shine brighter than any before it. A dynasty of poets and merchants, emperors and eunuchs, monks and dancers. This was the Tang Dynasty, China's golden age. After the collapse of the Sui in 618 CE, the realm again flirted with chaos. But from the ashes, Li Yuan, a general of Sui descent, seized power. He established the Tang Dynasty, taking the throne as Emperor Gaozu. His son Li Shimin, later known as Emperor Taizong, would transform the Tang from a fledgling kingdom into an empire. Military campaigns expanded China's borders west into Central Asia. Internal reforms revived land distribution and lightened taxes. The capital Chang'an became the largest and most cosmopolitan city in the world. This was not just a dynasty, it was a renaissance. Chang'an, the Tang capital, was unlike any city in history. It housed over 1 million people and was laid out like a checkerboard. Highly planned, grand, and diverse. In its markets, you could hear over a dozen languages: Chinese, Persian, Sanskrit, Sogdian, Korean, Arabic. Silk flowed west. Spices, horses, gold, and music flowed in. Foreign embassies lined the avenues. Buddhist temples stood beside Taoist shrines and Zoroastrian fire altars. This was China's window to the world. The Temps reopened and expanded the Silk Road, not just for goods, but for culture and diplomacy. Armies secured oases in modern-day Xinjiang. Envoys traveled to India, Persia, and even Byzantium. Artisans brought techniques from Iran, jewelry from Sogdiana, and music from Central Asia. The Chinese word for foreign hu became associated not with fear but with fashion. Foreign fabrics, instruments, dances, and ideas were embraced, even celebrated at court. If the Qin gave China structure and the Han gave it bureaucracy, the Tang gave it soul. This was the age of Tang poetry, Li Bai, the immortal drunkard, wandering mountaintops and composing verse like lightning. Du Fu, the sorrowful historian, whose poems chronicled war, suffering, and moral duty. Wang Wei, whose Buddhist-infused nature poems whispered of silence and impermanence. Art flourished as well. Landscapes became emotional, spiritual reflections. Court paintings captured falcons, horses, and imperial splendor. Music and dance, infused with Central Asian rhythms, dazzled at banquets. The Tang court became a beacon of refinement. In a society dominated by men, one woman rose above them all. Wu Zixin, a former concubine, outmaneuvered rivals, married 2 emperors, and finally seized the throne herself in 690 CE. She became the only female emperor in Chinese history. Wu promoted talented officials regardless of status, strengthened state exams, and patronized Buddhist temples across China. Her rule was controversial, firm, even ruthless, but it was also effective. She proved that power could wear any face. In 755 CE, powerful general of mixed Sogdian and Turkish ancestry, and Lushan, turned against the Thames. He led a massive revolt, capturing Luoyang and briefly occupying Chang'an. The court fled. Hundreds of thousands died. The rebellion lasted nearly 8 years, and the empire was never the same. The Temps survived, but its golden glow had dimmed. Military governors became more independent. The central government weakened. Taxes grew harsher. Corruption spread. The age of confidence had passed. Yet even as politics faltered, spiritual life thrived. Buddhism reached its artistic and doctrinal height under the Tang. Monks like Xuanzang traveled all the way to India, returning with sacred texts and stories. Temples grew rich and powerful. The Dunhuang caves, filled with murals and manuscripts, became a Buddhist library in stone. But by the 9th century, some emperors began to fear the influence of Buddhism. In 845 CE, the Tang launched a state-sponsored suppression, closing monasteries, seizing land and disrobing hundreds of thousands of monks. Buddhism would survive, but it would never again hold such power. In its final decades, the Tang staggered. Eunuchs controlled the court, peasant rebellions multiplied, empire fragmented into competing warlord territories. In 97 CE, the last Temp's emperor was deposed. China entered yet another period of disunity, the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. But the Tams had left behind something indestructible, a canon of poetry that still lives in every Chinese schoolbook, an idea of China as a global cultural force, a vision of imperial grandeur that later dynasties would seek to emulate. Next, the Shang Dynasty. Innovation without security, commerce without conquest, and a new kind of brilliance. In the wake of the Tang's golden age, China fractured once more. Yet from this disunity emerged something unexpected, not an empire of warriors, but a civilization of thinkers, merchants, and inventors. The Shang Dynasty would not conquer the world, but it would change it. In the Shang, China found new ways to be brilliant, new ways to be Chinese. After the Temps fell in 907 CE, China descended into 50 years of chaos, with warlords carving up the land. Then, in 960 CE, a military general named Zhou seized the throne and established the Shang Dynasty. He became Emperor Taizu of Shang, and his first act was to disarm his own generals, replacing force with civilian governance. This marked a turning point. The military would no longer dominate the state. The scholar official would rule. The Shang Dynasty perfected the imperial examination system, a grueling merit-based path where even a peasant's son could become a high official. Exams focused on Confucian classics, history, poetry, and moral philosophy. Success brought not just wealth, but prestige and political power. Education became the true ladder to social mobility. The scholar bureaucrat, the shidafu, replaced the sword-wielding general as the highest symbol of authority. This was Confucianism reborn and made real. Shang thinkers didn't just copy ancient teachings, they reinvented them. New philosophy emerged, Neo-Confucianism. Scholars like Zhou blended Confucian ethics with Taoist cosmology and Buddhist introspection. They explored the lie behind all things, the moral structure of the universe. Education became not just intellectual, but spiritual. This philosophy would dominate East Asia for centuries, shaping the minds of Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. The Shang may have lacked a powerful army, but they led the world in invention. Movable type printing, pioneered by Shang, revolutionized knowledge transmission centuries before Gutenberg. Gunpowder weapons evolved from fire arrows to protocannons. The compass, already known, became refined for navigation. Astronomical clocks, water-driven, tracked time and seasons with astonishing precision. Paper money, the world's first government-backed currency, facilitated massive urban economies. China in the Shang was the most technologically advanced society on Earth. The Shang witnessed an economic transformation. Cities like Kaifeng and later Hangzhou became bustling metropolises with over 1 million residents. Markets were permanent, open daily, regulated by the government. The Grand Canal and river systems linked the empire into a network of trade. Overseas commerce expanded dramatically. Shang junks sailed to Southeast Asia, India, and even Arabia. The result was a monetized, market-driven economy where merchants once looked down upon thrived. This was also an era of refined culture. Landscape painting reached new heights. Artists like Fan Quan and Guo, she captured the vastness of nature and the smallness of man. Poets like Su, she wrote with wit, melancholy, an insight into the human condition. Mathematics, geometry, and medicine advanced rapidly, building on and surpassing earlier traditions. In the song, subtlety became sophistication. A scholar's inkbrush spoke louder than a general's sword, but the song's internal brilliance could not shield it from external threats. To the north and west, powerful nomadic and semi-nomadic states rose. The Liao dynasty, ruled by the Khitan, controlled parts of the northeast. The western Xia, ruled by the Tangites, threatened the northwest. Later, the Jurchens of Tungusic, people from Manchuria, founded the Qin dynasty. In 1127, the Jurchens launched a devastating invasion. They captured Kaifeng, seized the emperor, and sacked the capital. This became known as the Jinkang Incident, a humiliation for the song. The song retreated south, establishing a new capital at Hangzhou. This era became known as the Southern Song. Though territorially reduced, the dynasty thrived. Southern trade networks exploded. Art, especially ceramics and ink painting, flourished. Maritime commerce expanded even further. Song ships dominated the East Asian seas. Southern Song China was more compact, but in many ways more refined than ever before. It was a civilization that had learned to survive, even without military might. But far to the north, a storm was gathering. The Mongols, under Genghis Khan, were conquering the world. By the mid-13th century, his grandson Kublai Khan set his sights on China. The Qin dynasty fell first. The Song held out longer, with brilliant generals like Yu Fei and later resistance near Shandong and Yamen. But in 1279, the Song fleet was finally destroyed. A young emperor, just a child, drowned with his court, held in his guardian's arms. The Song were gone. China had fallen. To the Yuan, the Song dynasty lacked empire, but it created identity. It gave China a literate, exam-based civil elite, a market economy tied to technology and innovation. It's a philosophical tradition that balanced science and soul, a culture that celebrated introspection over conquest. The Mongols would rule the land, but they could not rule the Song spirit. Next, the Mongols and the Ming, conquest, chaos, and a return to native rule. A new wall, a new fleet, and a new question. Should China look outward or inward? China had endured many conquerors, but none quite like the Mongols. They came from the steppes, swift, savage, and unstoppable. And when they took China, they didn't simply rule it. They redefined it. But from that foreign rule came a fierce return. A native dynasty rose with walls, fleets, palaces, and pride. This was the age of Yuan and Ming, of control and collapse, reform and retreat. Two dynasties. One shared legacy of ambition. The Mongols were not merely raiders, they were empire builders. Under Genghis Khan, they carved out the largest land empire in history. By the mid-1200s, they had conquered Central Asia, Persia, and the remnants of the Qin dynasty. Then his grandson, Kublai Khan, set his sights on the south. After years of war, he crushed the Song dynasty in 1279. He declared himself Emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty. The first time all of China was ruled by a non-Han emperor. Kublai Khan ruled from a new capital, Dadu, present-day Beijing. He adopted many Chinese customs, Confucian rituals, bureaucracy, taxation, but the Mongol essence remained. Ethnic hierarchy placed Mongols above Chinese. The civil service exam was suspended. Mongols maintained a separate military and legal system. Yet the Yuan were also open to the world. The Silk Road was at its safest, patrolled by Mongol cavalry. Marco Polo, the Venetian traveler, arrived in Kublai's court and described wonders unknown in Europe. Paper money, coal, and cities of staggering size. Trade flourished, cultures mixed. Ideas flowed from Italy to Persia to China. The Yuan ruled a globalized empire, centuries before globalization had a name. For many, life under the Yuan was stable, even prosperous. Artisans were protected, foreigners were welcomed, Buddhist and Taoist institutions received patronage. But for many Han Chinese, it was also a time of alienation. Confucian scholar class lost influence. Heavy taxation, Forced labor and famines took their toll. Resentment simmered beneath the surface. In the 14th century, disaster struck. Floods of the Yellow River devastated farmland. Plagues, possibly including the Black Death, ravaged populations. The dynasty weakened. The mandate of heaven was slipping away. Out of the chaos rose a peasant monk turned warlord, Zhou Yuanzhang. He had grown up poor, orphaned, and desperate. But he was clever and ruthless. Leading the Red Turbans, a millenarian Buddhist rebel movement, he fought the Mongols and rival warlords alike. In 1368, he captured Dadu. The Yuan court fled north, retreating to the steppes. Zhou declared the founding of a new dynasty, a return to Han Chinese rule. He became the Hongwu Emperor, first ruler of the Ming dynasty. The Ming represented a deliberate return to Chinese tradition. The civil service exam was restored. Confucian scholars reclaimed power. Capital was moved to Nanjing, and later Beijing was rebuilt into a grand imperial city. The massive Forbidden City began construction, a palace complex of unrivaled scale. The early Ming emperors ruled with strict discipline. Local militias replaced standing armies. Land was redistributed. Taxes were simplified. The goal: stability, permanence, a rebirth of the Middle Kingdom. While earlier dynasties had built walls, the Ming reimagined and expanded them. Over 5,000 miles of stone, brick, and earth, reinforced watchtowers, garrisons, and signaling systems. It was less a continuous wall than a network of fortifications. But the symbolism was clear. China would not be conquered again. The Great Wall became both shield and shrine, a monument to vigilance. During the reign of the Yongle Emperor, the Ming looked outward. He commissioned the legendary Admiral Zhang He, a Muslim eunuch, to command the treasure fleet. Between 1405 and 1433, Zhang He led 7 voyages across the South China Sea, Indian Ocean, and as far as East Africa. His ships were vast, larger than any in the world. They brought back exotic animals, spices, gold, and tribute envoys. China's prestige soared across the known world. But these missions were not about colonization. They were about showing the flag. When court factions turned inward, the voyages ended. The ships were dismantled. China, once a naval superpower, turned back inland. Ming China was vibrant, but tightly controlled. Urban life flourished. Printing houses, novels, plays, and opera spread literacy and entertainment. Ming porcelain, blue and whiteware, became prized across Europe and the Islamic world. Confucian values structured family life and local governance. But the state also grew paranoid. The secret police, the Eastern Depot, spied on officials. Laws were harsh, punishments brutal. Later emperors became reclusive, governed through eunuchs, or did not govern at all. The weight of such centralization eventually buckled. In the early 1600s, crisis returned. Climate change led to famine. Floods and locusts decimated crops. The treasury ran dry. Peasant rebels, led by Li Zicheng, marched on Beijing. In 1644, the Ming emperor hanged himself on a hill behind the Forbidden City. The Ming were gone, but the gates were now open. From the northeast, the Manchus' semi-nomadic warriors swept in, defeated Li, and claimed the mandate. A new dynasty was born, the Qing. The Yuan brought global connection, linking China to the Islamic world, Europe, and the Mongol steppes. The Ming brought restoration and pride, a return to native rule, tradition, and monumental ambition. One looked outward, the other turned inward. Both changed the world, and both left behind a question that would define China's future. Should China lead the world, or protect itself from it? Next, the Qing dynasty. Foreign rulers, internal rebellions, and the coming storm of modernity.
Adelaide.
The last dynasty rises. The Ming were gone. The Forbidden City had fallen. And from beyond the Great Wall came a new ruling house. Foreigners, horsemen, outsiders. But they did not destroy the Chinese world. They claimed it, preserved it, expanded it, and then they nearly lost it. This was the Qing dynasty, a story of conquest, brilliance, and the slow unraveling of an ancient order under the weight of modernity. The Manchus were descendants of the Jurchens, nomadic and semi-agrarian peoples from the northeast. In 1644, under Prince Dorgan, the Manchus entered Beijing and seized power, not as looters, but as rulers. They declared the birth of the Qing dynasty, but they did not dismantle Chinese traditions. Instead, they adopted Confucian rituals, continued the civil service exams, and kept much of the Ming system intact. But they also maintained their identity. Manchu language remained the imperial tongue. Q hairstyle was imposed on Han Chinese males, a visible sign of submission. Intermarriage between Manchu and Han was forbidden by law. The Qing were foreigners, but they became emperors and ruled China for nearly 3 centuries. From the late 1600s to the mid-1700s, the Qing entered a golden age under 3 powerful emperors, Kangxi Yongjing, Qianlong, under their reigns. The empire expanded farther than ever before, absorbing Tibet, Xinjiang, Mongolia, and Taiwan. The population doubled, approaching 400 million by 1800. The economy thrived. Agriculture, handicrafts, and foreign trade boomed. Confucian governance was efficient, the civil service system refined, and local magistrates well-trained. Kangxi especially is remembered as one of China's greatest rulers, a scholar, general, and reformer. Qianlong, in his early reign, ruled over a land at peace and prosperity, proud and inward-looking. But prosperity bred arrogance. By the 18th century, Western powers were knocking on China's gates. European traders, Portuguese, Dutch, and especially British, sought Chinese tea, porcelain, and silk. China, however, wanted little in return. Trade was confined to a single port, Canton. Foreign merchants could not learn Chinese, bring families, or enter the interior. This was the Canton system. China would trade, but on its own terms. In 1793, Lord Macartney was sent by King George III to negotiate broader access. He refused to perform the full kowtow. Qianlong declined every request, replying, "We possess all things. Your country has nothing we need." The Qing saw themselves as the center of civilization. But the world was changing, and China was about to fall behind. Britain found something China did want: opium. Grown in British India, smuggled into China in massive quantities. Millions of Chinese peasants and elites alike became addicted. The Qing issued edicts, banned the drug, and arrested dealers. In 1839, the Imperial Commissioner Lin Zexu confiscated and destroyed over 20,000 chests of British opium. Britain retaliated. The First Opium War was a humiliation. British gunboats overwhelmed China's outdated navy. The Treaty of Nanjing ceded Hong Kong, opened 5 treaty ports, and granted extraterritorial rights to foreigners. It was the first of many unequal treaties. The old world had cracked. China's decline had begun. The 19th century brought not just foreign invasion, but internal rebellion. Taiping Rebellion, led by a man who claimed to be Jesus' younger brother. It sought to establish a heavenly kingdom in China. At its height, the Taipings controlled large swaths of China and had a capital in Nanjing. Over 20 million died. One of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. Nyon Rebellion, Muslim uprisings in the northwest, and later, the Boxer Rebellion, a desperate anti-foreigner movement, all weakened the Qing further. These were not isolated revolts. They were the signs of a dynasty out of time. Some Qing officials understood the need for reform. The self-strengthening movement tried to modernize the military, build railways, establish Western-style schools. China purchased modern guns, built arsenals, even founded diplomatic missions abroad. But conservative forces, especially the court and Empress Dowager Cixi, resisted deep change. They adopted Western tools, but not Western systems. China modernized around the edges. Revolutionaries, inspired by modern nationalism and led by figures like Sun Yat-sen, called for a republic. In 1912, the last Emperor Poi, just 6 years old, was forced to abdicate. After over 2,000 years, Imperial China was no more. The Qing ruled China longer than any other non-Han dynasty. They expanded its borders, presided over a golden age, and held the mandate of heaven for nearly 3 centuries. But in the end, they could not stop time. They failed to adapt. They misunderstood the world, and they paid the price. China stood broken. But beneath the ruins, a new dream was stirring. A dream of reform, revolution, and rebirth. Next, the final chapter. From the Republic to the People's Republic. Warlords, civil war, and the rise of modern China. In 1911, revolutionaries toppled the Qing Dynasty. The boy emperor abdicated, and the Republic of China was declared in 1912, led by Sun Yat-sen, a Western-educated doctor and visionary's dream. A modern China built on nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood. The 3 principles of the people. Dreams are fragile. Real power quickly fell into the hands of military strongmen, the warlords, who carved the country into zones of violence and personal rule. China was a republic, in name only. From 1916 to 1928, China fractured once more. Northern warlords controlled Beijing. Southern warlords ruled the Pearl River Delta. In between, shifting alliances, betrayals, and civil chaos. Cities were taxed by multiple armies. Farmers conscripted or robbed. Railways destroyed. Famine spread. The Republic had no center. China was a giant, bleeding in all directions. In the 1920s, 2 political movements emerged. The Nationalist Party, led by Chiang Kai-shek, sought to unify China through military and administrative control. The Chinese Communist Party, founded in 1921, grew among workers and peasants, preaching Marxism with Chinese characteristics. For a time, they cooperated to defeat the warlords. But in 1927, Chiang turned on the communists, executing thousands in Shanghai and launching the First Chinese Civil War. The rivalry had begun. In 1934, the nationalists encircled communist forces in Jiangxi. Rather than be destroyed, the communists escaped, embarking on the Long March. Over 6,000 miles on foot, through mountains, swamps, deserts, and constant attack. Fewer than 10% survived. Among them was Mao Zedong, a peasant's son turned Marxist ideologue. He emerged as the undisputed leader of the Communist Party. From the Long March came myth, martyrdom, and momentum. The communists had lost territory, but gained destiny. In 1931, Imperial Japan invaded Manchuria, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo. By 1937, full-scale war erupted. Japanese troops captured Beijing, Shanghai, and Nanjing. In the Nanjing massacre, over 200,000 civilians were murdered. Cities bombed, villages burned, millions displaced. Nationalists and communists formed a shaky alliance, the Second United Front, but tensions remained. For 8 years, China resisted with little international aid, enduring the longest World War II campaign. Victory came in 1945, but peace did not. With Japan gone, the Civil War resumed. Nationalists, backed by the United States, held the cities, the government, and the foreign embassies. The communists, supported by the Soviet Union, held the countryside and the hearts of millions of peasants. Mao's promises of land reform and an end to corruption resonated. By 1949, communist forces took Beijing, then Shanghai, then Nanjing. On October 1, 1949, standing atop Tiananmen Gate, Mao Zedong declared, "The People's Republic of China is founded." The nationalists fled to Taiwan, where they remain to this day. China had chosen its new path. Under Mao, China underwent the most radical transformation in its history. Landlords were executed and land redistributed. Industries were nationalized. Education and healthcare expanded, especially in the countryside. But the experiments grew extreme. The Great Leap Forward aimed to industrialize China overnight. Peasants forced to produce steel and backyard furnaces. Farms collectivized, traditional practices banned. The result? famine. An estimated 30 to 45 million died, one of history's greatest human tragedies. The Cultural Revolution. Mao unleashed Red Guards, radicalized youth tasked with destroying the Four Olds. Temples, books, and artworks were burned. Intellectuals were beaten, jailed, or killed. Schools and universities closed. It was a revolution that turned on itself. Mao's power remained, but China was traumatized. In 1976, Mao died. The country mourned and exhaled. His chosen successor, Hua Guofeng, was quickly sidelined by a pragmatic reformer, Deng Xiaoping. Deng's message was simple. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice. Ideology took a back seat to practicality. Beginning in 1978, Deng launched market-oriented reforms. State-owned enterprises were liberalized. Special economic zones opened to foreign investment. Farmers gained land rights. Millions were lifted out of poverty. The economy boomed. Urbanization exploded. China began its transformation into a global power. But political freedom did not follow. In 1989, students gathered in Tiananmen Square, demanding democratic reforms. For weeks, they occupied the square peacefully, calling for dialogue. On June 4th, the army moved in. Tanks rolled. Gunfire echoed through the streets of Beijing. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, were killed. The world watched in horror. But the regime endured. The economy continued to grow, but now with an unspoken warning: challenge the party and pay the price. The People's Republic of China is now the second largest economy in the world, a global leader in technology, infrastructure, and manufacturing. A single-party state led by the Chinese Communist Party, with Xi Jinping as its paramount leader. It has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty. It has built modern cities, a space program, and a vision of national revival, the Chinese dream. But it also carries shadows, censorship, and surveillance. Human rights concerns in places like Xinjiang and Hong Kong, rising tensions with Taiwan, the US, and the West. China is no longer the sick man of Asia, but it is still navigating who and what it wants to be, from myth to empire, from splendor to collapse, from opium to revolution. From Mao to the market, China's journey has been long, painful, brilliant, and unfinished. It is a land of 5,000 years of memory, still shaping the future. Civilization that never died, only transformed. The dragon has risen, but its flight is still unfolding.